Hi, Steve and Joanne. I appreciate your patience as you've waited for this video. I'm actually excited to walk through some of the ideas that we have. It's interesting in these types of cases. There are often, various pieces of the puzzle, and part of the challenge, which I actually really enjoy, is trying to figure out how these various pieces of the puzzle fit together. And this is one of those situations where there's not a right answer, 100% right answer, or just one right answer is probably the better way of saying it. There could be, a number of different right answers, and the one that we ultimately go with is the one that you're the most comfortable with. But this is, I think, a right answer that we can talk through. And so I'll walk you through the various components and we'll go from there. So just to maybe provide a little bit of initial context, there's a few things that I think might be helpful for me to kind of sketch out. Okay, so context first. The name of the game, or what I was trying to solve for, I'm going to say solve for income. Okay, that's priority number one. We want to utilize our assets in such a way that we're creating as much income as we possibly can for you. And obviously, we want that as much of that income to be guaranteed as possible. We also want to build in some tax considerations relative to that income as well, because a tax efficient income is obviously preferable over a tax inefficient income. That makes a big difference. The other thing that I'm solving for too is a limited funding time period. In other words, we don't have the rest of your lives to continue to actively contribute to something. In other words, we want to limit the period of time within which we are creating or we're funding assets. We're putting money into something. We want to limit that window of time, and during the course of that funding time period, we want to be very judicious or very wise about where we're contributing that capital. Okay, so solving for income, limiting our time period. That's probably those are the two big ones. And for our purposes here, I'm using an 8-year window of time. I know that when we had talked before, it was kind of this 5 to 8 year window. As I'll kind of talk you through here, obviously 8 is better if we can get there. Anyway, let's jump in, and I'll talk you through a few of the pieces that we have to work with here. Now, one thing you'll notice probably is with the videos uploading to YouTube, there's a 15-minute maximum without upgrading your YouTube account. So I'll probably be splitting this into a two-part video as opposed to just one longer one. Okay, but hopefully that's not super inconvenient. Okay. First piece of the equation. Probably the most critical asset, I would say probably the most, or definitely the most critical asset that you have is the insurance policy. Okay, you have an existing policy. As I've taken a look at the anniversary statement, but even more importantly, the in-force illustration that Steve, you sent to me, I've come to some conclusions as to the policy that you currently have and whether that policy is going to be adequate for us in helping to implement some of these other strategies. First thing, I'll just kind of walk you through it. Okay, what you have, and we see these fairly often, is you actually have a universal life policy as opposed to a whole life policy. That's an issue, and I'll show you why that's an issue in just a second. But the mechanics of a universal life policy are as follows. they have an increasing cost of insurance. In other words, Steve, you're 55. Every year you get older, your cost of insurance goes up, and it goes up in an exponential way. So you at 55 versus say you at 75, your cost of insurance is going to go like that, right? And it's just going to continue to increase. And what that means is that in order for that cost increase to be met or satisfied, you have to have a certain amount of gain or growth in the market, because a universal life policy is tied to the market, meaning the stock market. So that market has to deliver. And if it doesn't deliver, right, if the market is delivering and satisfying that cost of insurance component, then there's a surplus and your cash value position increases. But as you've got this cost component going up like this, the market has to do more and more and more each year in order to cover that cost. And that becomes more and more difficult. And if there's a year where the market, the growth, that you know, if it's correlated to an index typically, if that index fund does not grow by more than the cost component in your policy, then the only way that policy can continue to exist is it has to use some of your cash value. In other words, it has to dip into its reserves. And if that happens too much and too often, then the policy's consuming itself and eventually it will lapse. And there's one sort of telltale sign of a UL policy, and that is this one: no guarantees. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you come down here and we go to the guaranteed section of this in-force illustration, right? You have to bypass all of these S&P 500 indexes and these hypothetical returns. Well, we're not looking for hypotheticals. We're looking for more certainty than that. Okay, and so if we come down here to the guaranteed section, scrolling, okay, so if we come down to these guaranteed values, you're going to notice a few things. First off, with your planned premium, well, this policy assumes that premium is going to continue to be paid, right? Well, that's not what we're after, right? We don't want to fund a policy. We don't want a $15,000 outlay at year 9, right? That the first year that we're not contributing to something any longer, we need to start to generate income. So we don't want to be obligated to continue to fund a policy after that 8th year. Now, even if you do that on the guaranteed side, even if you continue to fund that policy, what you'll notice is eventually your policy, and this has to do with that cost of insurance, right? That cost component is increasing all the way through until finally you get to the point to where the cost component, and you'll notice too that even though you're dumping in the $5,000, your cash value is increasing by less than the premium you're paying in. That's another problem, because the cost associated with maintaining this death benefit goes higher and higher and higher the older you get, and pretty soon, not only is there the policy lacks the ability to cause the policy to continue to increase in value, pretty soon the policy starts to eat into itself. The value starts to diminish until finally the only thing that you're left with is you've paid in $375,000 of premium and you have no cash value and no death benefit, right? That's obviously a problem, right? What we're trying to use the policy for, ideally, right, in an infinite banking context, where we're gonna deploy our accumulating cash values, what we want instead is we want for our policy to be our baseline, right? We want that to be our foundation, and then we want to be able to build on top of that foundation, right? With something like, say, real estate. We can't, and I can't in good faith and in good conscience advise you or recommend that you use this policy to deploy that cash value, right? If we're already dealing with something that has an exponentially increasing cost of insurance and the lack of certainty relative to these future values, it puts us in an incredibly compromised position to try to also leverage those values as your cost of insurance is continuing to increase. That position is far too precarious, far too uncertain for us to feel like we can actually we can utilize this policy to do other things with it. Okay, so that's kind of point number one. And to be honest, when we had talked last time, I wasn't sure at that stage what you had. Looking at the cash values, looking at your premiums. My thought going in was, well, if they have a policy that's with a good mutual insurance company and it's a good whole life policy, ideally with a paid up additions rider, if it's with a company that's reputable and strong, then let's just keep that existing policy in place and let's build out those other those other options, those other puzzle pieces, if you will. But in this situation, I think it would be worthwhile for us to consider replacing this universal life policy with a much more stable and much more steady whole life policy with PUA rider. Okay, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so we've got a couple of things here. Let me jump back to this slide. Okay, and I'll kind of sketch out just a couple of things here. Okay, so puzzle piece number one is our policy. Okay, so UL equals problematic, okay, for all the reasons that I just explained. So what we want instead is we want a whole life, okay, and what that means is we would 1035, there's something known as a 1035 exchange. That's where we bring over the existing cash value from the UL, so UL cash value into new whole life policy. Okay, so we salvage the existing value from that policy and we roll that immediately into the new whole life policy. Okay, now the other thing that I'm going to do is we're going to need to be more aggressive in the way that we fund the new policy. Last time we talked about the fact that you had $29,000 to about $30,000 of passive income, or not passive income, disposable. That's the key, disposable income. Okay, and real quick, one thing I might do is, I know we're coming up on about a 15-minute mark. As I get close to that 15, there's going to be a break in this video, and then I'll move to the next one. But the idea is that this 29 to 30,000, let's build a new policy around that number. Not that number plus the 15 that was going into this current UL policy, but just about a $30,000 per year capacity into this new policy. The other thing that I would add too is, when we looked at your financial summary last time, you've got some cash that you're sitting on. So I would recommend dumping in what's known as a lump sum initially on top of the 1035 exchange. So those things combined, whole life policy with paid up additions rider, plus the 1035 exchange coming over, plus an additional lump sum of just immediate cash in the beginning, all of those things will combine to give us a good portion of cash value that we can immediately start to utilize. Okay, and I'll talk you through that here in the part 2 of this video. So I'm going to save this one for now, and we'll shift over to video number 2.